Historical background of Indian Constitution. At least one question comes from this chapter in UPSC every year. Hello, my mappers. Let's go through this chapter so that you don't miss those marks. Let's get started. The history of Indian polity can be traced to 1600 when the Britishers came to India as traders. Now, they came to India to trade by acquiring the trading rights over India from the Queen Elizabeth. After about 165 years later, that is in 1765, the British acquired the Diwani rights that is required to collect the revenue and civil justice in the states of Bihar, Bengal and Orissa. This happened after the victory of British in a Battle of Buxar fought in 1774 between the Britishers and the Mughals led by Shah Alam. This was for the first time the British had acquired the rights to collect revenue and civil justice in India. In the year 1858, British took total responsibility for governance in India. In 1934, M.N. Roy suggested formation of Constitution of India. In 1946, a new Constituent Assembly was formed. India got independence in the year 1947, and in the year 1950, January 26th, the Constitution of India was adopted. Now, we'll go through the British Crown in more details. So let's begin. British governance in India can be split into two major parts. Part 1 is Company Rule and the Part 2 is the Crown Rule. Company Rule consists of Regulating Act of 1773, Pitt's India Act of 1784, Charter Act of 1833 and Charter Act of 1853. The Crown Rule consists of Government of India Act of 1858, Indian Council Act of 1861, 1892 and 1909, Government of India Act of 1919, Government of India Act of 1935, Indian Independence Act of 1947. Now we'll be focusing on the timeline of the Company Rule. One by one, we'll go through all the acts and the facts that are related to those acts. At the first, we have the Regulating Act of 1773. Now, this act was the first step by the British government to control and regulate the affairs of Indian East India Company in India. It also recognized for the first time the political and administrative functions of the company, and it laid the foundations of central administration in India. For the first time, it designated the Governor of Bengal as the Governor General of Bengal and created an executive council of 4 members to assist him. Lord Warren Hastings became the first Governor General of Bengal. It made the governors of Bombay and Madras presidencies subordinate to the Governor General. Also, it provided for the establishment of Supreme Court of Calcutta in the year 1774. The court consisted of 1 Chief Justice and 3 other judges. It prohibited the servants of the company from engaging in any private trade or accepting bribes from the natives. Also, it strengthened the control of the British government over company by requiring the Court of Directors to report on its revenue, civil and military affairs in India. The next act came Pitt's India Act of 1784. It was also known as Act of Settlement to update the Regulating Act of 1773. Now, the major features of this act included that it separated the commercial and political functions of the company, as in it distinguished between the two functions. Also, it allowed the Court of Directors to manage the commercial affairs, but created a new body called Board of Control to manage the political affairs. Thus, it established a system of double government in India for the very first time. Also, it empowered the Board of Control to supervise and direct all the operations of civil, military or revenues. This act was important for 2 main significance. First, it gave the company's territories in India to be called the British Possessions in India, and the British government was given the prime control over the company's affair and its administration in India. Charter Act of 1833. Now, this act came as the final step towards centralization in British India. It made the Governor General of Bengal as the Governor General of India and vested in him all the civil and military powers. Lord William Bentinck became the first Governor General of India. The Act also deprived the Governor of Bombay and Madras of their legislative powers. The Governor General of India was given exclusive legislative powers for the entire British India. The last in the series of Charter Acts was Charter Act of 1853. It was a significant constitutional landmark. It separated for the first time the legislative and executive functions of the Governor-General's Council. It provided for the addition of 6 new legislative members called legislative councillors to the council. In other words, established the Governor-General's Legislative Council, which came to be known as Indian Legislative Council. This was the legislative wing of the council, functioned as a mini-parliament, adopting the same procedures as the British Parliament. Thus, the legislation for the first time was treated as a special function of the government, requiring special machinery and special process. It introduced an open competition system for recruitment and selection of civil servants. This was recommended by Macaulay Committee in 1854. And at first, 6 members were added for Indian Legislative Council. 4 of them were from Bombay, Madras, and Agra. This was for the first time local representation was added in Indian Legislative Council. Now, we'll move to another part 2 of the British governance in India, known as the Crown Rule. So let's begin. Now, the beginning of the Crown Rule was with Government of India Act of 1858. This was a significant act enacted in the wake of the revolt of 1847, also known as the First War of Independence or the famously called Sepoy Mutiny. The act also came to be known as the Act of Good Governance of India and abolished the East India Company and transferred the powers of government, territories and revenue to the British Crown. The act provided that India henceforth was to be governed by and in the name of Her Majesty. The designation of the Governor-General of India was changed to that of the Viceroy of India. He, the Viceroy, was the direct representative of the British Crown in India. Lord Canning thus became the first Viceroy of India. It ended the system of double government in India by abolishing the Board of Control and the Court of Directors. It created a new office of Secretary of State for India, vested with complete authority and control over Indian administration. The Secretary of the State was a member of British Cabinet. The Act also established a 15-member Council of India to assist the Secretary of the State for India. The Council was an advisory body and the Secretary of the State was the Chairman of the Council. It constituted the Secretary of the State in Council as a body corporate, capable of suing or being sued in India and in England. The Act was largely confined to the improvement of British administrative machinery in India, by which the Government of India was to be supervised and controlled in England. After the revolt of 1857, the British government felt the requirement of cooperation of Indians in the administration of their country. In pursuance of this policy of association, the British Parliament enacted Indian Council Act of 1861, 1892 and 1909. We will study all these acts in detail. The first Indian Council Act of 1861. Now this act made a beginning of representative institutions by associating Indians with the law-making process. Thus, it provided that the Viceroy should nominate some Indians as non-official members of his expanded council. In 1862, Lord Canning nominated 3 Indians to his legislative council, the Raja of Benares, the Maharaja of Patiala and Sir Dingan Rao. Now we are required to remember these names. These are very important from the perspective of examination. The next feature of this act is that it initiated a process of decentralization by restoring the legislative powers to Bombay and Madras presidencies. It provided for the establishment of new legislative councils of Bengal, North, Eastern, West Frontier Province, and Punjab. Also, it empowered the viceroy to make rules and orders for the convenient transaction of business in the council. It gave an recognition to the portfolio system. Under this system, a member of the Viceroy's Council was made in charge of one or more departments of the government and was authorized to issue final orders on behalf of the Council on the matter of his department. The Act empowered the Viceroy to issue some ordinance without the concurrence of the Legislative Council during an emergency. The life of such an ordinance was to be 6 months. The next in line we have the Act of 1892. Act of 1892 increased the number of additional non-official members in the central and provincial legislative council but maintained the official majority in them. It increased the function of the legislative council and gave them powers to discuss the budget and addressing questions to the executive. It also provided for the nomination of some non-official members of the legislative council by the viceroy on the recommendation of the provincial legislative council. This act made limited and indirect provisions for the use of elections in filling up some of the non-official seats both in the central and provincial legislative councils. The word election, however, was not used in this act. The process was described as nomination made on the recommendation of certain bodies. The next in line we have the Indian Council Act of 1909. This act is also popularly known as Morley-Minto Reforms, as the Lord Morley was then the Secretary of State for India and Lord Minto was the then Viceroy of India. The act considerably increased the size of the Legislative Council both in the central and provincial. The members of the Legislative Council was raised from 16 to 60 and the number of members in the Provincial Legislative Council was not uniform. It retained the official majority in the Central Legislative Council but also allowed the Provincial Legislative Council to have non-official majority. It enlarged the deliberative functions of the Legislative Council at both the levels. The Act for the first time provided for the association of Indians in the Executive Council of the Viceroy and the Governors. Satyendra Prasad Sinha became the first Indian to join the Viceroy's Executive Council. He was appointed as a law member. For the first time, Lord Minto added communal representation for elections. That is why Lord Minto is famously known as the father of communal representation. It also provided for separate representation of presidency corporations, Chamber of Commerce, universities and zamindars. Moving on to the Government of India Act of 1919, the historical background of this act. On August 20, 1917, the British government decided for the first time ever that its objective was gradual introduction of responsible government in India. Thus, in the wake of this policy, the Government of India Act of 1919 was enacted and which came into force in 1921. The act came to be known as Montagu Chelmsford Reforms, as Montagu was the Secretary of State for India and Chelmsford was the then Viceroy of India. Now, the act relaxed the central control over the provinces by demarcating and separating the central and provincial subjects. However, the structure of the government continued to be centralized and unitary. It further divided the provisional subjects into two parts, transferred and reserved. The transferred subjects were to be administered by the governor with the aid of the minister responsible to the Legislative Council. The reserved subjects, on the other hand, were to be administered by the governor's Executive Council without being responsible to the Legislative Council. The dual scheme of government was then known as diarchy, derived from a Greek word. The Act for the first time introduced bicameralism and direct elections in the India. Thus, as we depict here, the upper house came to be known as Council of State and the lower house came to be known as Legislative Assembly. The majority of the members of both the houses were chosen by direct elections. It extended the principle of communal representation by providing separate electorates for Sikhs, Indian Christians, Anglo-Indians and Europeans. The Act required that the 3 of the 6 members of the Viceroy's Executive Council other than the Commander-in-Chief were to be Indians. It granted franchisee to the limited number of people based on property, tax and education. It provided for the establishment of public service, hence a central public service was set up in 1926 for recruiting civil servants. Budget was separated for the first time for provinces and centre. The Act created a new office for High Commissioner for India in London and transferred to him some of the functions hitherto performed by the Secretary of the State. Now we'll study the Government of India Act of 1935. The Act marked as a second milestone towards completely responsible government in India. The Act provided for the establishment of All India Federation consisting of provinces and princely states as unit. The Act divided the powers between states and units in terms of list. Federal list for the centre, provisional list for the province, and concurrent list for both. The statutory powers were given to the Viceroy. However, the federation never came into effect as the princely states refused to join in. It abolished hierarchy in provinces, and provinces got autonomy, where the governor and ministers are responsible for lawmaking as legislators. The Act provided for adoption of hierarchy at the centre. Consequently, federal subjects were divided into reserved subjects and transfer subjects. However, this provision of the Act did not come to operation at all. The Act introduced bicameralism in 6 of 11 provinces. Thus, the legislatures of Bengal, Bombay, Madras, Bihar, Assam, and United Province were made bicameral, consisting of a legislative council, upper house, and a legislative assembly, lower house. However, many restrictions were placed on them. It further extended the principle of communal representation by providing a separate electorate for depressed classes, women, and laborers. It extended the franchise. About 10% of the population got the voting rights. The Act provided for the establishment of Reserve Bank of India to control the currency and credit of the country. The Act abolished the Council of India, established by the Government of India Act of 1858. The Secretary of the State for India was provided with the new team of advisors. It provided for the establishment of not only Federal Public Service Commission but also a Provincial Public Service Commission and Joint Public Service Commission for 2 or more provinces. The Act also provided for the establishment of a federal court, which was set up in the year 1937. The Act was a lengthy and a detailed document having 321 sections and 10 schedules. Now with this, we have come to the end of the Government of India Act of 1935. Next, we will be moving to the final Indian Independence Act of 1947. The Act came from the Lord Mountbatten Plan, which came forth on June 3rd of 1947. The Act ended the British rule in India and declared India as an independent and sovereign state from August 15, 1947. The Act abolished the office of Viceroy and provided for each Dominion a Governor General who was to be appointed by the British King on the advice of a Dominion Cabinet. It was replaced by Governor General, and the office of the Secretary was replaced by the Secretary of the State for Commonwealth. The Governor General at centre and the Governor at the province were nominal head. It continued civil services. Constituent Assembly of the Dominion of India and Pakistan could make any changes in the British rule and could repeal the Independence Act itself. Now the princely states at the time of independence were free to join any of the sides of India and Pakistan or could choose to remain independent. In this video, we have used various abbreviations for the purpose to make the material compressed and shortened. Now, the list of these abbreviations will be given in the description box below. If you have any doubts, please mention it in the comment section below. If you want to watch similar videos for the mind maps, please subscribe and hit the bell icon. Till then, stay safe, take care, and never stop learning.